I'm Mark Ryan, this is Super Review, and this is the Simgot EA1000. This is an IEM that frankly, a lot of people have been asking me to review, and frankly, I'm probably a little bit late on this guy, but nonetheless, we are here to review it anyway, and well, what we've got here is a single dynamic driver plus a passive radiator is, I believe, the driver configuration on the EA1000. They're charging around 220 bucks, so it's kind of putting it in competition with things like the Moondrop KATO and the Dunu Falcon Pro Ultra, which just came out recently. And for the past couple of weeks, maybe a little bit longer than that, I've been listening to the EA1000 and comparing it with IEMs like those. And I'm ready to let you know what I think. So before we get into this, I guess a quick shout out to Simgot for sending this in for review. I've got them linked in the description down below. But yeah, with that out of the way, let's go back to where we just were and let's talk about the build, the physical aspect of the EA1000 before we get into talking about the sound, and then we'll do some comparisons, some head-to-head comparisons with those other dynamic driver headphones I mentioned. All right. So physical stuff here on the EA1000. Let's punch in on this guy. I think aesthetically it's pretty nice actually. It is just kind of simple and classy. The outer panel does look like kind of just like a plain white, but it is behind what looks like a glass, and there is, I don't know, some light texturing there, and it's a subtle effect, but I think overall, like combined with the stainless steel outer, it's actually a pretty good looking little IEM. Again, it's very simple, but I dig the way it is made. The cable that it comes on, let's punch out for that real quick, and I'll give you, this is a nice cable, although you might be able to tell it's a little bit memory prone. It's kind of regaining its shape, a little bit springy, which I think does let it down a little bit, but overall I think it's a very handsome cable. It's a nice weight to it, so it's not too heavy, not too lightweight, and it does have a chin slider that mostly stays in place. Up top, you've got your standard 2-pin connectors and preformed ear hooks. Nothing much to talk about there. It's a good cable. I would leave it on this IEM, but if you were looking to swap it out, you certainly could. I did do a little bit of forming with the ear hooks using a hairdryer, just because I found that stock out of the box, the ear hooks weren't wrapping around my ear quite well enough. But honestly, that's pretty common with IEMs. I am pretty used to taking a hairdryer to the maybe one day I'll do a tutorial on that. Does anyone want to watch me use a hairdryer? Maybe not. Anyway, let's talk about the shape of the IEM real quick. And I think, you know, it's fairly typical for a dynamic driver shape, right? It is not overly molded for the ear, right? You're not going to get sort of a semi-custom design. So that means that fit stability on this guy is just okay, but pretty typical, honestly, for a dynamic driver. I would say that fit on this is perfectly average and perfectly adequate. Maybe one thing that is worth calling out is that the nozzle is a little bit on the long side actually, which was interesting. And I guess I'll do a bit of a fit demonstration here to show you what it looks like in my ear. But generally, you know, despite the long nozzle, I didn't really have any issues with it sticking outside of my ear. Right? You can take a look at what the EA1000 looks like in my ear, and you can see from the side profile, it is, you know, hanging out inside the concha and not sticking out. The one thing I will say about the angle on that nozzle is, I guess it's the angle combined with the length of it, is that it does fit a little bit weird. And I find myself that sometimes, like half the time that I plug this into my ear, I actually don't end up with a seal and I have to pull it out and refit it. It's a small little thing, but I thought worth pointing out. But yeah, you can see there, once it's in there, it's, you know, it's fairly secure, although you can pull it out with enough force, but who does that? Besides this guy right here. Anyway, yeah, so, you know, generally pretty happy with the build on these things. They are an all metal shell. They've got a nice weight to them, makes them feel a little premium. And, you know, just enough bling on them that I think it backs it up. I guess I didn't really talk about what else you get inside the box. This is the box. Fermat's last theorem. I don't really know what that's a reference to. I'm not a scientist. Never claimed to be. And this is the carry case that it comes with, which is, you know, a nice little case, although a little bit bigger than I typically like. And then it's got some space in here for, I'm not totally sure what I would use that for. And of course, your standard Simgot ear tips, full collection. The other thing that they've got, and I didn't talk about this yet, is swappable nozzles. And apologies for the fingerprints. That is deep in there and hard to get rid of. But yeah, the Simgot does have these screw off filters, right? So you just come here and if your fingers aren't greasy, you just screw that off. You take one of these other nozzles, you screw it on, and I'll just warn you that you want to pay attention to the color of the rubber band there, and make sure that the left and the right, you're using the same color rubber band. Otherwise, you're gonna have kind of a weird mixed up tuning left and right, which is probably not what you want. That said, honestly, the difference between the different nozzles isn't massive. I graphed them, they're up on Squiglink if you wanna check them out. So I've graphed what this thing measures like with the gold, the silver, and the, the red rubber band nozzles. Pretty minor differences. And I'll be honest, after graphing it, I pretty much just listened to it on this version because, well, we'll get into talking about the sound next, but this is already kind of a bright leaning IEM, and the other nozzles just kind of made it even a little bit more bright leaning, which didn't seem like a thing I necessarily needed. Anything else to talk about the physical stuff? I don't think so. So let's jump in and talk about the sound here on the EA1000. And I already did allude to the graph a little bit. I'm not gonna pull it up right now. If you wanna take a look at the graph, I've got it again on squig.link. What I will say is that sound signature wise, I would describe this as kind of like a bright leaning V-shaped sound signature, but it's like kind of like a mild, tasteful V-shaped sound signature, but it's definitely on the upper mid range and sort of lower treble level emphasis. I don't know why I jumped into talking about the sound signature, because honestly, the thing that stands out to me about this thing isn't necessarily the sound signature. I mean, that will come across. But what instantly stands out about the EA1000 is the technical performance on this thing. For a single dynamic driver, especially in this price range, right? Like the only other dynamic driver that, really starts to impress me even more in terms of technical performance would be something like, I don't know, a Sennheiser IE600, which is quite a bit more expensive than this, and also quite a bit more aggressive in the treble tuning for sure. But yeah, I would say that the technical performance on this, guys, it's really pretty solid. And it's, maybe honestly, it's been a while since I've been listening to other dynamic drivers in this price range, including the Moondrop KATO. Frankly, it had been a while since I heard it. So I of course, pulled out the KATO, listened to it. Again, we'll get into that comparison a little bit more in depth in a bit. But right away, I was instantly surprised at like how kind of soft the KATO sounded versus the Simgot EA1000. Just like really a lot stronger, a lot more incisive in not just the treble hits, but also in the bass. Like the bass attack is really, it's interesting because this is not an especially bassy IEM in terms of how it graphs, but when you listen to it, the bass impact is definitely a dominant characteristic. And probably that is coming from, some combination of the bass curve with that lower treble emphasis just really hitting that attack quite well. But the incisiveness on this thing just really does stand out. And that also contributes to, really strong separation between sounds, as well, fairly wide stereo separation. Really pretty impressive in that way. Again, the tuning I would describe on this as being somewhat on the bright V-shaped sound signature. It's contrasty, I would say, right? Rather than being kind of like a smooth laid back listen or anything like that. It's definitely a contrasty listen that is exciting. It's maybe a little bit on the aggressive side and definitely very engaging. And again, the bass, you look at this thing on a graph, it's not gonna look like the basses stand out in any way, but you listen to the thing and the way that the bass is done and executed, it really is like a very impressive and standout aspect of this IEM. The only, complaint I guess I would give is that, okay, that, V-shaped sound signature does give, again, it's like, it just kind of downplays the mid-range a little bit, which, it is what it is. But it maybe can also just be a little bit overly digital in the treble if I'm being picky. And I don't know, maybe I shouldn't be that picky because at $220 for a dynamic driver sound, this thing's honestly pretty fun. So I promised I would do some comparisons. So let me pull in a couple of other IEMs that you might be thinking about shopping against the EA1000. Here we've got the Moondrop KATO. I believe the price on this thing is 180 or 190 bucks, so a little bit cheaper, but single dynamic driver. And then over here, we've got the Dunu Falcon Pro Ultra, which is our latest version of it. Also single dynamic driver, and the price on this, I believe, is 260 bucks. So the EA1000 kind of fitting somewhere in between. how I would compare them. All right, let's see. Physical form factor, honestly, they're all kind of similar. They obviously look different, but in terms of them all fitting like a dynamic driver, which is to say they're not really custom molded. They've all got kind of weighty metal shells. I would say that the Dunu is the sveltest of the bunch. This one fits the deepest into my ear, and maybe fits the most secure because of that, but I don't know, they're all fit kind of similar, to be honest. And yeah, I don't know, aesthetic wise, I probably prefer the KATO just because it's like this clean metal shell. The Dunu coloration, I don't know if I'm a big fan of the blue, if I'm honest. I mean, it's unique, but maybe the more classy look of this Simgot is more my style. Now, let's talk about the sound though, okay? This is where I think it's kind of interesting because they are all doing roughly the same thing in terms of driver configuration. Again, this one's a little bit different in that it's got a passive radiator, but I don't really know how much that's doing there. But they are quite distinctly different when you listen to them. So where this is kind of like a mild V shape on the bright side, the KATO I would describe as kind of a mild V shape on the warm side, on the bassy side. And that is definitely a distinct difference when you listen to these things, these two IEMs back to back. So this is like bright and aggressive. This is more laid back and warm. The technical performance on this thing does definitely, versus the EA1000, it does not stand out. Like, it's still pretty solid. In fact, I really like the bass character on the KATO when I reviewed it a couple of years ago when it came out. It's still very solid, but you can definitely tell that it's not, you know, as tight and precise as your modern hybrid driver IEM. But honestly, the EA1000 does. I think it holds up more to the modern expectations for technical performance there. The Dunu is actually kind of interesting because I think it somewhat resides in the middle of these two, both in terms of tuning as well as in technical performance. I think like the imaging and width on this is not as standout as it is on the EA1000, but it's better than you get on the KATO. It's just a little bit more laid back of a V-shaped sound signature versus the EA1000, which again is a little bit more bright and aggressive. But it's not as laid back as the Moondrop KATO. And so because of that, I think you get a more incisive treble, you get cleaner distinction between sounds, a little bit better spaciousness, but I don't know. I don't think either of these necessarily stand out in terms of spaciousness. The one thing that does stand out above and beyond on the Dunu is the bass character. Now, I think the EA1000 does a surprisingly close job of approximating the bass physicality that you get here on the Dunu. And again, the Moondrop, it was no slouch in terms of bass physicality, but I do think up against these two, it is a step behind. But I do think that overall, the bass physicality on the Dunu is still a step ahead of the EA1000. Just kind of gives it a little bit of an extra special something, but of course it is also a more expensive IEM, and there are some other trade-offs there. So which one are you gonna prefer? Hopefully I've described them in a way that you can predict which one would better fit your listening preferences. Honestly, for me, it's a little bit tough. I feel like, I guess maybe it's just kind of a cop-out. I'd probably take the middle ground, less aggressive than this. And so I think the sound signatures on these maybe just, they suit more music, whereas with like live and acoustic performances, the EA1000 can really stand out. But with some, modern pop, it might sound a little bit on the aggressive side, which, sometimes might be exactly the mood I'm in for, but I don't know. It's, I guess I'm lucky that I've got all three of them here on the table with me. But yeah, I think that will do it for my review here on the EA1000. Except of course, I got to give it a score. And out of 5 stars, EA1000, honestly, look, this is a really nice looking build. I think a fair price at 220 bucks, and you get a uniquely technical performance out of a dynamic driver presentation. I'm going to give it a very solid 4 stars out of 5. And if you want to check it out, of course, I got it linked in the description down below. Again, shout out to Simgot for sending this one in for review. While you're down there, if you like this video, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ding the YouTube bell. And I'll catch you on the next super review. Cheers.